Among the many icons in gaming, a few manage to stand above the rest. Not as mere flash in the pans that last a short time and then fizzle, but the one with the real star power, the staying power, to not just become amazing series, but to eventually branch out and have sub-series and spin-offs to call their own. One such star that has been around on the scene, frankly, for about as long as I have, is none other than the Blue Bomber, MegaMan. Going strong since 1987, born under the Japanese moniker Rockman for the style of music, he boasts 11 numbered main sequels, countless ports and remakes, numerous guest star appearances across every medium, and equally countless spin-offs with their own sequels and spin-offs of those spin-offs. It's tough to find a character as timeless and loved as MegaMan, but loved as the classic totally not Astro Boy character is, my personal favorite incarnation of the character comes from the franchise's first spin-off. If you're a fan too, you already know who I'm talking about, MegaMan X. Specifically, at least for today, we'll be taking a look at the first three games, MegaMan X1 through X3, or what I grew up calling the SNES trilogy of games. This is technically untrue, as X1 and X3 had PC ports, and the latter of which also found its way to a few other consoles, with anime FMVs and new arrangements to its soundtrack. But I also spent 20 years calling it that, so I'm not liable to stop anytime soon. And before I get into mechanical comparisons, which are important for the Mega Man X series as a whole to establish its own identity, let's introduce the cast of characters who matter the most for the sake of these three titles. First off is Mega Man X himself. Often called X for short, and also help differentiate him from the classic blue robot hero, he serves as our look into the 22nd century when the game takes place. Created as Dr. Light's magnum opus, he was supposed to be sealed within a capsule to test his morality for 30 years. A time frame that would extend past the good doctor's mortal human lifespan. However, X wasn't uncovered until over 100 years later, when one Dr. Kane unearthed his high-tech cradle and found that X was a terrifyingly complex machine, still being without peer even a century later. I assume this means that Dr. Light either had a eureka moment in material science in his twilight years, or had gone slightly mad. Or, quite possibly, both. At any rate, X himself doesn't get a great deal of characterization, at least in-game this early on in the series, but we do know something about him, courtesy of official sources and more readily available to us courtesy of the in-game art book in the Mega Man X Legacy Collection set of games. We learn that X is only a B-rank or middle-class hunter, with many of his peers attributing it to inexperience, what really should be viewed as his penchant for mercy. X is essentially being forced by circumstances to hunt down Reploids, or those robots who are based on dumbed-down copies of X's own designs, who used to be in the same unit as him in the organization known as the Maverick Hunters, specifically Unit 17, which X was a member of when Sigma began his coup against the Federation. The Federation of what is left largely unclear, and we'll talk more about that later on. And while we don't actually know much about the Hunters as an organization, we will be revisiting them in future installments as tidbits about them become known. Suffice to say, X is a sort of reluctant hero who does what he does because there's no other choice. And, like the X that constitutes his namesake, represents the mathematical notion of the variable, or limitless potential. It said early on in his career, only Zero and his commanding officer Sigma saw this potential. Next is Mega Man X's closest friend, the Red Robot Zero. We actually won't be delving into Zero's backstory for now, as it'll become more important next time. What's important for now, meanwhile, is that, well, he's a he. The long blonde ponytail not doing him much in the way of favors here. A few of my friends growing up were certain he was a war-torn lady. Setting that aside for now, he's armed with similar Buster arm cannon and armor as X himself, and is quite the veteran of many conflicts. He encourages X to use his potential to grow into an ever greater hunter, the likes of which will surpass even his best someday. And I'm just going to stick a pin in that because, again, it'll be more important next time. And now it's time to touch on the villainous forces prominent throughout the game, the first being Vile. Yes, he looks like a purple Boba Fett. Your power of observation is unparalleled, Internet. You're hilarious. Vile serves as the first boss encounter of the series and hence has cemented himself as recurring pest, as he would again return in X3 and X8. More on those when we get there. Vile himself is a sadistic maverick working under Sigma's employ seemingly because it benefits his own desire to cause havoc for its own sake. It also serves as catalyst for X wanting to grow stronger and bring about peace, as the first time you encounter him, you have to lose the fight for the story to progress. Though in the PSP remake, you can legitimately defeat him. Speaking of, Vile, in every appearance he makes in this series, will always be weak to ice weapons. That's some good continuity right there. And lastly is the series-long big bad, Sigma. This giant of a Reploid always has his chiseled jawline and a smug grin of a schemer, being the epicenter for most of the Maverick uprisings over the course of the series. Mostly, more on that later. Sigma's base nature, as we learned over the course of the series, is more akin to a virus than a normal AI system, able to infect and corrupt lesser Reploids who don't enjoy the complex systems that effectively immunize the likes of X from such attacks. This also gives him the frustrating and scientifically questionable quality of being able to manifest outside of a freshly destroyed body in order to float to safe havens in the wake of his numerous defeats. And even when blasted point blank by an antivirus program directly into his code, it slows him down about as much as blowing him up does, which is to say, almost not at all. However, he doesn't need to infect a Reploid in order to sway people to his side, as he's also the sort who is masterful at picking at people's insecurities and prejudices in order to get them to align to his ideals. Alright, with the major players established, next let's have a quick look at the mechanical breakdown. For sake of comparison, while the classic Mega Man games focus largely on single-room platforming challenges, usually resulting in damage or unceremonious death in the event you made a mistake, the X series, meanwhile, focuses more on smooth-scrolling levels and different types of enemy encounters instead. Not to say that there are no platforming puzzles, there certainly are, and now in greater variety due to enhanced mechanics I'll touch on in a moment. But the basic idea is shared between both games. After an opening level that serves as de facto tutorial, you're free to choose one of 8 levels, each culminating in a big boss fight. After beating a boss, X will copy one of their weapons in order to turn it against the other bosses in an elemental game of rock, paper, scissors. That's the broad strokes anyway. Each of the games has their own unique spin on a set of new mechanics too. Starting from the first game, X has the ability to scale walls, even jumping straight up the same wall over and over, giving him a greater range of vertical movement. And while it requires an armor upgrade in the first game, found in a spot where you literally cannot miss it in Chill Penguin stage, X is also given a dash, which can be comboed into the wall jump for greater mobility still, making X the most agile of those who take up the Mega Man moniker. And from X2 going forward, it's just something that he'll start with by default, and the leg armor upgrades will have different effects instead. And yeah, let's talk about the Easter egg hunt that constitutes one of the many ways X gets stronger over the course of the game. Every level contains a heart tank, which boosts his maximum health. 4 of them have refillable spare energy tanks, which take the place of the consumable E-tanks from the classic series, and there are 4, technically 5, Dr. Light capsules awaiting you to be found, improving the functionality of X's buster, armor, legs, and... well, the helmet upgrade is literally only good for 2 things, and both of them are technically optional, so let's put that down as helmet aesthetic purposes. So by the time you're arriving at the last of the Maverick stages, you have more than twice the health you started with, take much less damage, and deal much more damage in a wider variety of ways. Something unique to the first game, and unless I'm mistaken, entirely unique to X1 even across the Mega Man franchise, is dynamic level layouts. What do I mean by that? Well, for instance, if you start a fresh game and clear the intro stage, then choose Flame Mammoth stage to begin with, you'll find a fiery factory flush with chugging machinery and lava-like death traps awaiting you. This stage can be tricky, and Flame Mammoth stage is a tough one to begin the game with. So let's say, for hypothetical purposes of this video, you die and go back to the level select screen. Well, let's say that you try to opt a different level, and for the sake of argument you choose Chill Penguin. Well, along the way you're going to get the aforementioned leg armor upgrade and find a much easier boss encounter and the ice weapon to your name. So that's pretty great. And now you're all ready to take revenge on Flame Mammoth, so you head back to his stage. But wait, look, the stage is frozen over. The once lethal lava traps are no more, solidified in convenient platforms. The machinery traps are simplified and getting through the stage is much easier now. Wow. And this isn't just unique to Flame Mammoth stage. Want to cut Spark Mandrill stage in half? Do Storm Eagles first and watch as the airship demolishes the opening leg of the level and cripples the mid-boss for you. Want that power-up in Sting Chameleon stage but you can't quite make that jump? Well, do Launch Octopus's stage and find it flooded with water, aiding in your jump to get there. Things change and become easier if you just tackle different levels, greatly reducing the inbuilt frustration factor of facing an otherwise unchanging level design. This is a brilliant use of the pick any order you want to go in logic employed in the game. This is something I wish the X series of games had continued to employ, but alas, this is the first and last time we'll get the touch on this. which is a shame. Anyways, X1 has the most straightforward plot you can have. X has to stop the Mavericks. Once you destroy all 8, you go to Sigma's fortress and end the rebellion. Zero sacrifices himself to destroy Vile's otherwise impervious ride armor, and X will obtain the Buster upgrade if he had failed to collect it from Flame Mammoth's stage beforehand. X eventually battles Sigma, his attack dog, and then a fusion of the two, bringing the first game to a close. In the end sequence, X contemplates his methods for bringing it all down, literally, and watching the untold destruction and waste caused by his actions. All he knows is he'll have to face off with the Mavericks again before he truly knows the answers for sure. And also, as an aside for you babies out there whinging about the only the Mega Buster on his arm knows for sure line, just cut it out. If this was a weeb-tastic samurai film and they said the same thing about his glorious 1,000 times folded Nippon Ichibanzai steel blade, you wouldn't say a thing and you know it. Anyway, X2 comes next and doesn't really bring anything particularly noteworthy to the table mechanically, but I'll share a fun technical fact about the opening stage boss encounter. This enemy is actually a moving background layer with a hitbox over its spike ball hands and the weak point head. It's actually a clever use of system resources to not overload the sprite layer with activity and still make a boss fight that looks larger than life. Several other SNES games use a similar tactic to convey large enemy encounters as well. In fact, X3 does this too. X2's major story contribution is to give us the worst Teppen card in the game. What I meant to say is that it introduces the X-Hunters, or known as the Counter-Hunters in Japanese, Sergei, Agile, and Violin. By defeating these 3 mid-bosses before you run out of Mavericks to hunt, you recollect Zero's missing parts: head, body and arms, and his legs. Doing this successfully before undertaking the Sigma missions allows you to skip an optional battle against the boss fight, Copy or Black Zero, with the newly revived Maverick Hunter joining you at the 11th hour. X then takes down Sigma, concluding the second uprising. In the ending scroll this time, there's a minor variation between whether you did or did not manage to save Zero in the downtime, though all future installments generally assume that you did. The price for peace is often high, X contemplates as the game comes to a close. Then, in the last game we'll be looking at in this analysis, X3, the plot suddenly shifted due to the actions of one Dr. Doppler, who instigates an uprising all his own. And it's in this game Zero becomes partially playable as a super character who can swap out with X. He has very high stats and an instant kill Z-Saber slash attack that would soon become his iconic weapon of choice. However, he only has 1 life and you lose him forever in the event that you mess this up. However, X3 decided to go big on treasure hunting, as in addition to the heart tank, sub-tanks, and armors, there are also 4 collectible ride armors that can be summoned from a particular platform. There are armor chips, which modify the armor upgrades one step further, and a hidden one which even enhances all 4. And then, even the ability for Zero, under the right conditions, to hand his Z-Saber off to X, which becomes part of the full charge shot combo. Along the way, you'll be challenged by mid-bosses Bit and Bite, who will eventually fuse together in the final leg of the game into the God Car Machine, and they're more annoying than truly difficult, and defeating them or not doesn't actually change the game's outcome any. Once you clear out the 8 Mavericks this time, you arrive in Dr. Doppler's lair, only to find out that Doppler himself is merely being used, and Sigma is, of course, behind it all. Based on some criteria which can change between runs, with Doppler himself or Zero lending a last-minute assist after you destroy Sigma's body in order to incapacitate the virus self, represented by a wireframe model, which was quite impressive back in the SNES era, and then they all wonder if they truly seen the last of him. Here, we're told that X's fate has already been decided for him. To save mankind, he must destroy Zero. Why this dire prophecy is laid out before us, only time will tell. I really think the SNES trilogy should be called the X trilogy of games, because they all focus on X himself. And while the X series was the first Mega Man game to allow for multiple playable characters, it stuck to the roots of the series and the plot, themes, and overall gameplay mechanics focused on X himself. This set of games has X establishing himself as a Maverick Hunter in his own right, growing so strong as to become viewed as a worthy enemy by Sigma himself. While he never fought alone, as you can meet Dr. Kane in X2 and Zero will talk to you throughout X3, it shows the continuous growth of the title character through to the very end of the first trilogy. X represents a protector, someone who fights because they wish for peace badly enough to fight for it. It makes for a character both conflicted and complex. The end monologues show his thoughts are filled with regretting having to turn to violence in the first place, and wondering why humans and Reploids alike share their propensities for violence in the first place. This will be a theme X will visit as the series goes on, but this is where our look at the first 3 Mega Man X titles will come to a close. In summation, They're all fantastic games, are an excellent onboarding point for people who are both newcomers and veterans alike. And that's the core theme and mechanic of the first 3 X titles, growth towards limitless potential. Next time, join me as we look into MegaMan X4, X5, and X6, and break down the series all the more into the more dialogue-heavy and narrative-focused tone and storytelling. And I'll see you there.